Greetings, dear friends. We are happy to welcome you again to Mount Zion Church. This is the 47th year of this celebration, and it has always been sponsored by Seattle College and Mount Zion Church. As you gather here to remember the work and message of Dr. King, it becomes especially important in the times that we are facing here in our country now and in the world. So we hope that the celebration today will help you to remember and be renewed as you gather here to remember the work of Dr. King and the work in this community. We are pleased again that you come to be with us today, and we ask you to remain committed to the work and message of Dr. King. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm pleased now to introduce Ms. Monique Ming Laven, who will be our MC today.
Hello, everyone. It is so very good to see you today. My chest is just pounding right now, and I think part of it is because I'm a little nervous, but I think more of it is because of DaNell, Daymon and Greater Works. I mean, these guys are just fantastic. I don't know if you've heard this before, but I can't help but thinking it's like being in the room with you is like having a spoonful of honey and a shot of Red Bull at the same time. It is amazing. Thank you. So how is everybody today? All right. Yes. Earlier in the week, did you think, oh, maybe I won't be there on Friday? But luckily it cleared up for us all, and it's wonderful to be in your company today. I just really want to thank you for allowing me to be here because, to be honest, I need you. I need to be here today in the middle of this warm group of people with people who look like me and people who don't look anything like me. All ages, races, religions, sexual preferences, identifications, gender, whatever you want to call it, the figurative colors in the rainbow. It is wonderful to be in this group today. All of us are so different, but so similar. As Dr. King once said, not everyone can be famous, but everyone can be great, because greatness is determined by service. You only need a heart full of grace and a soul generated by love. And that is what can make any of us great right now, in the future, and yes, that is what can make us great again. As I said, I'm Monique Ming Laven, the evening anchor at KIRO 7. It's great to be talking to people and actually see the whites of their eyes and not just be looking into a lens. It's wonderful to make a connection with you right now. This past year has been really hard. It's been stressful. It's been dispiriting. I think all of us have experienced that. I have to confess to often be feeling like I'm drowning in the negativity and the division that we actually have to report. And it is real. We know that. Hate crimes are up. Politics are pulling us apart. A lot of the times we can't even agree on what is a fact. So thank you for letting me be in this room with you right now, where there is unity in purpose, in community, and in the belief that we can all be great in ways that truly matter. We are going to have a special program today, and this right here is just part of the audience. Look up there, there's some cameras. That's because SCC TV is live streaming this, so please give everybody a wave who's joining us from afar. And in case of emergency, just some housekeeping here. You see where the exit signs are, but I think we're going to be seated and maybe popping up when these folks perform again, but we'll be here and safe and enjoying ourselves. I'd also like to recognize some of our very special guests today. Please try to hold your applause until the end, but these are some leaders and servants in our community. Maybe if they just want to raise their hands briefly as I introduce them so that you can connect the names with the faces. Seattle College's Chancellor Shouan and from the Board of Trustees, Steve Hill, and Robert M. Williams, and also the Vice Chair, Rosa Peralta. Of course, the Reverend James O. Stallings, who's here, and our speaker, Dr. Tricia Rose. You'll hear from her in a little bit. We're also honored to have with us today Senator Patty Murray and Congresswoman Primila Jayapal. We know nothing is happening in DC right now, so we expected you to be here. Also Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkan. We also have former trustee Constance Rice and former mayor Norm Rice. I say former, but forever leaders. Okay, now look up in the balcony right here, these young faces. The small but mighty 8th grade class from Brightwater Waldorf School in Seattle. They were here with us last year too. It's so wonderful to have your spirit and energy with us today, and you all are a year older, wiser, taller, and you remind us we should have changed in the last year as well, so thank you for being here. Also with us, Seattle Police Chief Carmen Best and fellow police officers over there. Seattle Fire Chief Harold Scoggins, his fellow firefighters and our first responders. Thank you all for your service. Members of the Seattle City Council and King County Council and other elected officials. Also Frank Blethen and Charlene Blethen, the publishers of the Seattle Times who support this event. Thank you so much for getting the word out. We also have education leaders from our community colleges and public schools, including Denise Juneau from Seattle Public Schools, Dr. Kevin McCarthy, president of Renton Technical College, Dr. John Mosby, president of Highline Community College, Dr. Sheila Edwards Lange, president of Seattle Central College. Ooh, you brought some people with ya. Dr. Rosie Raimondo Cherensap, president of South Seattle College. In the audience, we also have former Seattle College's trustees and chancellors. Thank you for being here. And a special thanks to Seattle College's faculty, staff, and students who sponsor and program this terrific event. We know it's a lot of work. What a group we do have here, and now someone who would love to welcome this whole group, this whole community, Congresswoman Primila Jayapal.
Good morning, everybody. Monique, thank you so much for that, for those wonderful words and for the work you do every day. Thank you to Seattle Colleges and Chancellor Pan for hosting this celebration along with Reverend Stallings. Thank you so much for your service and leadership, and to Mount Zion, which has been such an important institution in our midst in this city. Also just want to recognize our mayor, Mayor Durkan. Thank you for your service, and our city council members, including Lisa Herbold and our two newest city council members, Dan Strauss and Tammy Morales. We are looking forward to your service as well. What a glorious morning it is. And I need glorious mornings right now. We all do. We all do. But it's glorious because we have before us an example of true shining service, of leadership in the most dark and difficult times, of a man who put everything that was not him ahead of him, a man who took controversial positions that were seen as controversial anyway because they weren't popular at the time that he took them, a man who had prescient leadership about so many things. And I have been privileged to feel the inspiration and the influence of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. throughout my life and career as an activist, first for immigrant and civil and human rights, and now as a United States Congress member, the first Indian American woman ever in the United States Congress. And one of only 14 immigrants, people who were born outside of the United States, but of course, unless you are Native American, whether you came over on slave ships or you came over seeking refuge, we are all tied to a history that involves immigration. I first learned of Dr. King because of his connection to one of the great leaders of my birth country, Mahatma Gandhi. And like Gandhi, Dr. King was a once-in-a-generation leader. Like Gandhi, Dr. King tackled tall walls of tradition and practice that kept our society segregated and divided. Like Gandhi, Dr. King believed in the principle of satyagraha, which means insistence on truth, the principle that gave foundation and fire to his nonviolent campaign for civil rights. And that insistence on truth is what we all have to summon today. The truth of pervasive sexism, racism, and anti-Blackness, of xenophobia, homophobia, and transphobia, of Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, and yes, of white supremacy. The truth of the American worker fighting the rising tides of inequality and corporate supremacy in order just to earn a living wage, to put food on the table and take care of their kids, afford to stay in their home, and pay for universal health care for everybody. The truth of the desperation that drives immigrants and refugees to our borders and the despair of parents who are ripped from their children. The truth of a climate crisis that threatens our planet and endangers our children and our children's children. The truth, my brothers and sisters, of endless wars that have no use in this world, that desperately requires peace and justice, diplomacy and development, not war. But amidst all of that, the reason I say this is a glorious morning and a glorious day to be here in the glorious Mount Zion is because this is our work, and Dr. King showed us that way, to do the work with conviction, with passion, and with truth. To let us not forget the truth that even as the forces arrayed against us try to sow fear and hate and divide us, what Dr. King knew and what we all knew is that we are all in this together and our liberation is bound up with one another. So as we celebrate Dr. King, let us move through the world united by our insistence on truth, clear-eyed about the challenges we face, yes, but also buoyed by our shared values and solidarity. And in closing, there's a quote I want to read you from Dr. King, and there are so many, and we know so many of them. But many people know the same quotes. You know what I mean? They say the same quotes from Dr. King, and he had such a volume of incredible thinking and writing and leadership and scholarship. And one of my favorite quotes actually comes from the speech during the March on Washington, but it's not often quoted. And so I thought that I would quote it here. "This is no time to engage in the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to lift our nations from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood and sisterhood. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children." Thank you, Dr. King, and thank you to all of you.
Thank you, Representative Jayapal, for your words and for also the reminder that being a leader and a servant go hand in hand. And now, the mayor of our great city, Mayor Jenny Durkan.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Congressman Jayapal. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I thought this was Mount Zion. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you, Reverend Stallings. Thank you to all of you. Mount Zion is such a historical place. It is really woven in to the fabric of our city. I want to call a special thank you to Norman Constance, for all you have done for our city, for all you have done for me. Thank you so much. To Chancellor Plan and the colleges who've done so much to plan this, your commitment to the young people of our city, to a better world is inspiring to me every day. Thank you so much for all you do. I am so honored to be here to talk at Mount Zion, and it is fitting that we're here today to talk about the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. Since its first service, Mount Zion Baptist Church has always stood for justice, for liberty, and for peace. This church not only embraces those values, it has been at the heart of those values in our city. For me, I will forever hear the words about justice in the voice of Reverend Samuel McKinney. I was so lucky as a child to come and hear him when my father brought me to this church, and hear his voice over the years, to see his call to action, to see how he implored us to be a better city and all that he has done. None of us can walk through these doors without thinking about Reverend McKinney and thank him. Thank you for his legacy. Dr. King, as Congresswoman Jayapal said, was a real hero to so many of us. He was a champion for justice, for the voiceless, for those who had seen but always been denied their part of the American dream. He was a teacher. He challenged us all to make freedom a reality. He particularly challenged governments, because he knew without government and without its active work, we could not combat racism. We could not undo the remnants of slavery and discriminatory policies and practices. And we could never achieve true justice, true liberty, and true freedom and equality. When Dr. King marched with garbage workers in Memphis, or faced the dogs on the bridge of Selma, or spoke to us with that voice from the National Mall to implore a nation to justice, he did it with steadfastness, with determination, but also with hope. He implored our nation to bend that arc towards justice, to make sure that we too could march, that we could face dogs on bridges, that we could speak for justice. As Congresswoman Jayapal made so clear today, so much seems dark. So much seems dark. So much seems further from justice. And sometimes things seem without hope. We must not forget the hope that underlies Dr. King's message. With his challenge to more moral justice is the hope and determination that we can do it. But he also showed us that hope must lead to action. Hope must lead to action. Because without the action, hope can come despair. Hope can become despair. So let us leave here today together to be committed not just to the words of Dr. King, not just to the hope, but we need that hope. Let us be committed to the action to bend that arc closer to justice. As mayor, it has been such an honor and privilege to serve this city and work with so many, including those in this church today, with our council, with our officers, with all who stand here for justice and truth. And I commit to you that together we can continue to build on what we need as justice. We've taken some real steps. We know that as the other Washington talks about building walls, we will build bridges. When they talk about coming for immigrants and refugees, we will protect them. And when they side with white nationalists or hate, we will say no. We must make the words real. We must stand for hope. We must stand for determination and justice and true equality. We must do all we can to provide opportunity so every student, as we have said, in Seattle can have free college and a shot at our economy. So people can have a home to live in and a place to rest their heads. So they have a shot at a job that pays them a living wage. So they can see their face in the government that serves them. So that we look more like the society we are demanded to serve. And together we can build that. Apart, we never can. So let us leave here with determination, but with hope. Let's hold our hands together in optimism, and let's stand for those words and those actions and those beliefs of Dr. King, not just today, but every day this year. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mayor. Good reminder there that hope is not just a noun, it's a verb. Well, we've got our brains moving now. Let's get our toes tapping again. How about that? We need a shot of you guys again. Let's hear again from one of the world's greatest choirs, DaNell, Daymon, and Greater Works.
America. Isn't that powerful? Isn't that inspiring? Let's give them another round of applause. Good afternoon. I'm Shouan, Chancellor of Seattle Colleges. I want to thank all of you for joining us as we celebrate the life and legacy of Dr. King. We relish our relationship with Mount Zion Baptist Church and take pride that at our 47th celebration, we're the oldest and the longest running MLK celebration in Seattle. This day gives all of us, students, faculty, neighbors, government leaders, and dear friends, the opportunity to reflect, recharge, and rededicate ourselves to creating a community that is loving, caring, just, and equitable, as envisioned powerfully, passionately by Dr. King. Creating equity by meeting people where they are and provide the kind of assistance they need to live a dignified, quality life is a shared cause in our community. Many leaders have dedicated their lives' work to this cause. I want to take a moment to recognize two community pillars, two special leaders whose life work exemplify public service in our community. First, our King County Council member, Larry Gossett. And another gentleman, I'm not sure he has arrived, which is City Council member Bruce Harrell. Larry and Bruce have been strong supporters of our colleges and dedicated public servants. On behalf of Seattle College's Board of Trustees, faculty, staff, I want to publicly acknowledge them for their service. Larry's fight for justice started at an early age, and his commitment to civil rights serves as a reminder that the fight for justice is not over, it lasts a lifetime. Thank you, thank you. Bruce was an early supporter of our 13-year scholarship program that started at the South Seattle College. The program served as the foundation for today's Seattle Promise program that expanded to all 17 high schools in Seattle Public Schools. So please, again, join me in thanking those two servant leaders for their leadership and their service. As we gathered here to celebrate Dr. King's legacy, we are reminded of the powerful vision and promise for all people in America that he passionately painted in his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. Dr. King dedicated his life to fight for a freer, fairer, and better future for every American. The work we do today in Seattle and indeed throughout the United States is connected to Dr. King's vision and work. That is, we are together endeavoring to deliver a promise to the youth that their future will be brighter, their lives will be better. Dr. King spoke eloquently about the importance of education, especially the hope and possibilities it brings. His words still ring relevant and poignant today. I quote, "We must remember that intelligence is not enough. Intelligence plus character, that is the goal of a true education. The broad education will therefore transmit to one not only the accumulated knowledge of the race, but also the accumulated experience of social living." I would like to think that the Seattle Promise program is paying homage to Dr. King. And as the mayor said just a few minutes ago, the Promise program will pay dividends for us now and the future generations. While we're here to celebrate the accomplishments of Dr. Martin Luther King, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the leadership and the vision of another giant in our community, the late Reverend Samuel McKinney. Reverend McKinney was a giant among leaders in the Northwest. He helped launch Seattle's first Black-owned bank after local banks restricted loans to African Americans. He served as the original member of the Seattle's Human Rights Commission, which successfully advocated for the passage of Seattle's first Fair Housing Act. In the 1960s, he took part in the civil rights demonstration in Seattle, Alabama, and Washington, D.C. And he talked his college classmates, Dr. Martin Luther King, into coming to Seattle, to this very church in 1961, Dr. King's only visit to the city. Seattle colleges in Reverend McKinney's name created a scholarship. It is a small but significant way. We pay homage to his legacy. We use higher education to pay homage to his deep conviction that religious faith requires a commitment to social justice and equality. Now it's my pleasure to invite Dr. Sheila Edwards-Lange, president of Seattle Central College, to present this year's award. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Edwards-Lange and a special recipient, Ms. Radia Baru, this year's scholarship recipient, to the podium.
Good morning. It's my pleasure to say a few remarks about our scholarship recipient. Reddit is the second oldest of 5 children. She's worked several jobs during her formative years in her native Ethiopia to provide for her family. She was unable to attend college after receiving her high school diploma, but her drive and determination brought her to the U.S. in June of 2014. She continued to work different jobs, but never lost sight of her goal of going to college. So she came to Seattle Central and finished her English as a second language coursework. She is currently working towards her Associate of Science degree, and she plans to transfer to a 4-year university. And I'm so proud. Her ultimate goal is to earn a doctorate in computer science, which we so desperately need. She is an outstanding student, but during her free time, she enjoys reading books and newspapers and building relationships with people in her community. Please join me in congratulating Radia Baru, this year's recipient.
Good morning. Would you all mind standing and singing the Black National Anthem with us? Lift every voice and sing. Lift every voice.
Lift every voice and sing.
Till earth.
Till earth and heaven ring.
Ring with a harmony.
Ring with the harmonies of liberty.
Let our rejoicing.
Let our rejoicing
Rise.
rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea.
Sing a song full of faith.
Sing a song full of the faith that the darkness has taught us.
Sing a song.
Sing a song full of the hope that the present brought us.
Facing
Facing the rising sun
of our new day.
of our new day, we learn. Let us march on to victory is won.
Sing a song full of faith.
Sing a song full of the faith that the darkness has taught.
Sing a song. Sing a song.
Full of the hope that the present brought us.
Facing
Facing the rising sun of our new day, we run. Let us march on till victory is
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I don't know if any of you have seen this beautiful little baby who's here in this second row, but I just love seeing her face, and she has kind of, yeah, there she, look at her. And she, for some of this morning, she had kind of that baby drunk face. And then they start singing and she lights up. It's terrific. Reminds us of the great power of your voices. Thank you so much. Lift every voice and sing. I love the voices that we have with us here today, especially the one you're about to hear. You have likely seen her before if you watch PBS, MSNBC, CNN. Dr. Tricia Rose is where people turn to understand truth and authenticity. She speaks the language of Yale, where she got her BA, and of Brown University, where she earned her Ph.D. and now leads the Center for the Study of Race and Ethnicity in America. Dr. Rose also speaks the language we hear on the radio, on the street, and in our communities, with groundbreaking work on hip-hop, pop culture, and social issues. And she is fluent in both because just like people who know the Romance languages, because they're rooted in Latin, she speaks the language of research and of culture because they're rooted in experience and truth and wisdom. Now she is going to lift her voice, and we're all going to rise with her. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Tricia Rose.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Goodness. This is very generous, very generous. How are we feeling? We're feeling good? I don't see how we're not feeling good, really. I mean, I was doing fine until we got to Mary. Mary tore it up. So I actually, I'm gonna have to bring that back. I have a point to make about that song, so don't you worry, I'm not gonna forget. I just need to say my proper thank yous first. Good afternoon. It is a profound delight to be here with you to celebrate the extraordinary legacy of Dr. King in this historically important place, Mount Zion Baptist Church here in Seattle. Coming together as a community
in the spirit of hopefulness and justice is as important today as ever. And everyone has said that, but I'm going to drill down a little bit later. You know, you invite an academic, you can't help it. Something's going to get drilled down somewhere along the way. So coming together as a community in the spirit of hopefulness and justice is important today as it has been in a long time. So seeing so many people here taking time out of their busy day, the young people in the balcony and the next generation, and the elders who carve the path we walk. This is a blessing to see this cross-section of the community in so many ways. And it's also a personal blessing for me coming out to Seattle. I love Seattle, I've been here many times, but my dear friend Yoshiko Harden, who I haven't seen in forever, hey there, we got to catch up and connect. So that made it a personal blessing. It's been far too long. And also the snow tried to keep me away, which is saying something, because I'm from the New England area where snow is supposed to be our thing. So I said, I'm just gonna come out early and wait on the snow. I've been waiting since Tuesday. I gotten a lot of work done in my hotel room, but I didn't see any snow. So I'm thrilled it didn't keep me away. So, you know, I wanna, you know, when I got this lovely invitation, I thought, goodness, what is there to say? I mean, everybody has said everything there is to say about Martin Luther King. And I mean, at some point you begin to feel like, you know, you're repeating yourself and other people, which is, you know, not what we're supposed to do up here in this profession I'm in. So I said to myself, what can I share that would really matter to me that would help us, I hope, is my goal, think about what it takes to challenge the world that is going on right now. What of King should we be taking, or what should we be taking of the legacy of the civil rights movement, not just King, that can help us the most today? So that's really what I want to focus on. And that means not only talking about Martin, but it means talking about the power of storytelling. And I don't just mean tell us a story, because we're very good at that. We're in the most storytelling moment in human history, right? There's a story for everything, and stories that work against the story, and so on and so forth. So I'm not just saying that, but I'm saying that there's a politics to a story. A story has a point of view, and that point of view governs what happens later after we've internalized the story. So it goes down easy, and then these other seeds are planted in our interior cells that create basically a situation where there's no avoiding the story and its consequences. So when I think of Martin Luther King, I want to start with the stories in my mind and what they told me about the history of the civil rights movement. So when I think of Martin, so many images come to mind. Most of them involve King standing in front of thousands of black people, marching, singing, and chanting in an extraordinary legacy of civil disobedience. Sometimes I see King along with many others, facing snarling dogs that are being used by the police to terrorize citizens. I see high-pressure water hoses to punish and deter freedom movement activists and local marchers. Other times, in my mind's eye, I don't see King directly, but I see scenes of nonviolent protest. I see the contorted faces of violent, enraged white counter-protesters yelling vicious epithets, warning them, spitting on them, pushing and threatening, hoping to provoke these young men and women and children into reasonable self-defense. I know that these public taunts, as I'm seeing this in my mind's eye, they were the tip of the iceberg. The potential for even greater violence hovered in the background. In other mental snapshots, I hear King's extraordinary voice, his intonation, his ideas, his moral vision. I don't just hear this dreaming vision of the kind of world he imagined, but I hear a well-developed moral vision that paid as much attention to how we get to this world that we want as to the world we are going to visit. These are powerful images for me, and when I close my eyes, they feel as though they're memories. I may look old enough to have been there, but I wasn't. This closeness to the signs and sounds of the civil rights protests, sharpened by the lyrical and poignant phrasing of his speeches, are very powerful for me. And I'm thinking of phrases like, as some of these were said today, but darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. The time is always right to do what is right. And injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Now, the civil rights movement brought down Jim Crow segregation, and Martin Luther King's leadership was essential to that heroic victory. But he did not and could not do it alone. Fighting and influencing alongside Martin, and in places Martin never trod, were exceptional leaders and soldiers in the movement, such as Ella Baker, Fannie Lou Hamer, John Lewis, Bayard Rustin, and the brilliant and dedicated artists like James Baldwin, Harry Belafonte, and Lorraine Hansberry. Thousands of others were vitally important. The power of the movement flowed in large part from so many courageous everyday people, whose names I do not know, but whose courage formed the backbone of one of the most powerful social movements for racial justice the world has ever known. The story of overcoming Jim Crow is a classic David versus Goliath story. How could such a despised and legally bound, disregarded, and disrespected people mount a movement that ends up rewriting the racist laws of a violent, powerful, and cruel state, laws expressly written to prevent their freedom? To paraphrase my beloved Audre Lorde, how is it that African Americans were able to use the master's tools to actually bring down the master's house? It's an exhilarating story with many profound victories. And to celebrate King means to celebrate all of these people and participants. The stories surrounding the images and scenes in my mind do not grow old. They continue to inspire me. I often wonder if I could be so courageous today. And I mean that, and I think we should ask ourselves what that would look like. These stories that are a part of this history are worth telling again and again. We need to be reminded today of what collective courage for a common good looks like. We need to be reminded of what it looks like when a people who have had all the reason in the world to expect that their courageous protests would end with them and their family members being pulled out of their beds in the middle of the night, never to return. They did not accept the fate others had chosen for them. They carved a new one. They stood up with dignity in the name of justice, not in the name of hate and retribution. When we tell this story of the civil rights movement, we center the profound legacy of African Americans hoping in the context of hopelessness. And I just want to talk about that Mary song real quick right here, because I was thinking about it while it was going on. And it was, it reminded me of the profound power of the role of African American music to embody the spirit, not only of resilience, but of a raw grit, a kind of intensity of possibility that is made manifest by the music in performance. This soloist was extraordinary and captured. She created, as the song built and as the solo built, she created and left in her wake the very strength that keeps movements going. You could almost see it following behind her. It didn't start out in the beginning because she was warming us up. We didn't know what was coming. But by the end, I was like, you're absolutely right. I'm ready. I don't even know what for. And yet, when we tell this story of the civil rights movement in the wake of this kind of energy and spirit, there is no absolute triumph. The story of the civil rights movement, when told through African American culture and practice, there is no absolute triumph, because to end Jim Crow did not mean to end racism itself. And so you win and you're losing at the same time. How do you live with that? What tools do you create? Well, the first thing you do is you tell a story in the way that I've described we've told this story, right? We tell the story in such a way that the victories are cherished, all the while knowing that new battles for justice are already around the corner. And in this story about the civil rights movement, there is great courage and victory, but it is a cautionary tale. Fighting for justice is not easy work. Our celebrations, to me, are richer and deeper when we deeply remember what suffering went on and continues. In fact, there's always been a ferocious backlash to this kind of freedom movement. We see it after emancipation, we see it after Jim Crow, and one could say we see it after Obama. But the story of the civil rights movement has not always been told from this African American perspective, nor as a cautionary tale, as a story where victory is not absolute. It's also been told in the mold of a classic American success story. You can almost see someone gesturing like this as they tell it. It's been told in the mold of this American success story where the victories are final and total, and that the moment in the story when resolution happens tells the story of civil rights as bringing us together and allowing the story of our alliance with David over Goliath to build a sense of immediate common identity around the underdog in alliance with the despised for the love of the least of these. And this part of this story is a good thing. It is a great thing. But I have some challenging news. There is great peril in this version of the story. It's not going to get us where we want to go. This unity that it relies on is actually based in the message that racism itself has been overcome, and that we are in a post-racialized society. Without such a sweeping victory, the story arc toward complete victory would not make any sense. So when it's told as a national triumph over racism, it provides us with the most effective myth about the reality we live in and where we are now. This version, too often, is a simplistic fairy tale ending story with a relatively uncomplicated vision. Jim Crow is dead, and racism is over. We live on in harmony, let's celebrate, we won. That's basically my summary of the plot. But did we? Did we really win? Yet. And so what I really want us to think about here is that this story told in this way creates the unconscious belief that anti-Black racism itself is defeated. And that link in our common imagination is profound and is driving much of what we're dealing with today. So the fact that the civil rights movement, this idea that it is itself the ended anti-Black racism, is not only flatly untrue, but it's the kind of story about this amazing history that obscures the truth. Actually, I would say it's even worse. It makes us disbelieve the truth. When the victories of the civil rights movement and all of the courageous power are identified with so much victorious weight to have ended not just Jim Crow, but all racism, we undermine the truth and, perhaps unintentionally, undermine the very victories we want to celebrate. I was doing some research related to some other projects and found a very respected study about 8 years ago about racial attitudes related to equality. And it makes my point quickly and probably better than I ever could. It says that in a poll, 82% of whites said that we are already or will have racial equality soon. Of this, 61% of that 82% believed we already had it. By sharp contrast, only 17% of Black Americans think we have already achieved racial equality. This is not a little bit of difference of opinion. This is a fundamental different orientation to reality. And it means that if we're not willing to grasp what that gap is about, then we're basically going to live in the fiction of this alternative version, the American success story version of the civil rights movement. This misperception and this gap have dire consequences. This myth that we've basically overcome it all offers an upbeat, non-racist appearing justification for those who want to dismember the civil rights movement's very hard-won protections. Recent efforts to dismantle the protections of the voting rights depend entirely on this illusion that we've ended specific forms of racial discrimination. I'm just going to be specific because somebody might ask me, well, what does she mean? Give me some evidence. In 2013, the Supreme Court effectively struck down the heart of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 by a vote of 5-4, freeing 9 states, mostly in the South, but not all, to change their election laws without advance federal approval. The court was divided along ideological lines, and the two sides drew sharply different lessons from the history of the civil rights movement and the nation's progress in rooting out racial discrimination in voting. At the core of their disagreement was whether racial minorities continued to face barriers in voting in states with a history of discrimination. Folks got trouble voting in Cleveland. You know they still have some trouble voting in Alabama. This is not limited to voting rights. Affirmative action had to be called some whole lot of other things till we got to right now diversity. I'm not sure what's coming after that, but just keep carrying affirmative action along the way in your subconscious. These challenges to the notion of actually trying to change what's happened historically, the effects of the history of this treatment, have been really fierce and effective, so that the notion of there being an affirmative action program is actually using race in any way equally bad is the principle, and that it's reversing discrimination by favoring previously unfavored groups. But it's based on the same idea that since racism is over, we have a level playing field, we should use colorblind admissions hiring and so on. Disbelief is so deeply held, the disbelief that there's structural discrimination in play, is that to create opportunity for people of color when clearly impediments exist, people can still claim that this is a case of reverse discrimination and that whites themselves are the most discriminated against group in society. That's another study. We're not going to go there. That's a little too, that's off point for poor Dr. King, so we're going to. These myths are not driven just by the story of the civil rights movement. They're fueled by behavioralism. What's behavioralism? It's an argument that the outcomes that we see in Black and brown communities are the result of their own doing, that there are no structural forces, no circumstances that are contributing to the outcomes and the circumstances. So, for example, when we find poor performance in schools or higher dropout rates, these outcomes are attributed to their supposed lack of interest in school. Some go even further than that. There's no explanation among these behavioralists that poor teacher-student relationships, substandard educational practices, or all the pressures these kids face might be contributing to their relationship to school. High levels of incarceration, some people think, are the product of criminally oriented youth culture, not the result of racially specific hyper-policing that stops and frisks and humiliates young people en masse and therefore catches things because they're constantly harassing. They catch things that elsewhere in other communities go unnoticed. And I have a big lecture class at Brown University, and when I talk about this issue of stop and frisk in the context of the class, you know, everybody's attentive. It's a majority white, classroom, just, we're at Brown, okay. And so I wait and I say, well, look, right now, I bet you, if I got some police with some dogs and they came up in here looking for drugs, I think they'd be pretty successful. I said, so if I just closed the doors, brought in some police and asked them just to turn your pockets inside out, what do you think, and then if you didn't have the protection of the university, what do you think would happen? Stricken. I mean, they were all like, half of them were about to, check their bag to see exactly how many years they were gonna go. This kind of myth about Black communities' criminality and disinterest in education extends to financial management. So if you remember during the housing crisis of 2008, the Black communities had much higher rates of foreclosure. If you believe this widespread institutional discrimination is over, then the high foreclosure rates were therefore so-called logically caused by financially irresponsible people who borrowed more money than they could pay back, not the fact that subprime lenders targeted Black women and poor communities of colors. Of course, there's a substantial data to show that many Black applicants who qualify for low-interest loans were steered to high-interest subprime loans. And there was even the proverbial smoking gun at Wells Fargo, where they found a memo referring to these explicitly discriminatory loans that were offered in poor and working class and middle class Black neighborhoods. They were literally called ghetto loans. The Center for Responsible Lending in 2002, that may seem like a little while ago, but not at all. That's very short time ago. 2002, high-income African Americans were 3 times more likely to be subjected to subprime terms than low-income whites. I'm going to repeat that. High-income African Americans had 3 times of a chance to be given a subprime term loan than low-income whites. This kind of discrimination, what I would call and other scholars call structural or systemic racism, paralleled Jim Crow and continues in our world today. King worried a great deal about what this integration in northern cities and towns around the country were doing to perpetuate Jim Crow-like outcomes absent Jim Crow signs and structures. This is why King turned his attention to Chicago. He focused on the open housing movement, also known as the Chicago Freedom Movement, between 65 and 67. They went to Chicago because of the large black population and very high levels of segregation, substandard housing, educational discrimination, and rampant police brutality. King moved into an apartment at 5550 South Hamlin Avenue on Chicago's west side to dramatize the conditions. Chicago was chosen, but it was not an exception. Most, if not all, cities around the country outside of the South, including big liberal cities out west like Los Angeles and San Francisco, central Midwestern towns like Detroit, Philadelphia, Cleveland, Baltimore, New York, Boston, and dare I say Seattle, all offered and practiced profound levels of systemic racism in housing. James Baldwin's film, and you can find this on the internet if you haven't seen it, it's worth seeing. It's called Take This Hammer. Features Baldwin talking on the streets of San Francisco in the mid-1960s with a group of young black men about their experiences in schools and looking for jobs. It's a sobering thing to watch. These young men know the differences between Jim Crow public discrimination and what they call private discrimination that doesn't rely so heavily on hate. Despite these differences between public and visible and backdoor, Baldwin bluntly says, there's no difference morally between the facts of life in San Francisco and the facts of life in Birmingham. This is Baldwin's cautionary tale. He's saying, while some things are improved, significant impact of systemic racism continues today. I do not think it would be an exaggeration for me to suggest that Baldwin's phrase could be paraphrased and revised to say, today, there is no moral difference between the facts of lives for people in 1965 versus now. How can I say this? Why am I asking us to keep our eye on what has not yet changed? The main reason it has to do with the extraordinary impact of every choice we continue to make now on the future of our communities. So I want to focus on education because education and its relationship to housing really create this bedrock of both opportunity and potential long-term intergenerational lack of opportunity. So I want to focus on the question about the reliance of property taxes to fund public education. This is the mother lode of inequality in our educational system. These are not small matters. These are rather significant. But basically, by funding public education using property taxes, it fundamentally discriminates against the poor. It also creates communities that have been stigmatized and therefore have lower market value to have access to less credit and repairs, not just budgets for education. That means their housing values are more at risk, and as a result, they actually have fewer taxes in the years ahead to pay for the same education for more children in the community. For us to decide as a nation, still here in 2020, that some children should receive fewer educational resources because they come from a community with a lower tax budget is morally repugnant. We are consolidating the disadvantages of the disadvantaged. Poor schools with at-risk students carry more burdens based on their circumstances. The difficult teaching environment created by fewer resources and overcrowding means that the experienced and highly valued teachers choose less stressful teaching assignments in schools elsewhere. And no schools that need the best possible teachers frequently don't get them. And then, of course, teachers are often carrying implicit bias from society as a whole in how students get evaluated and the use of stereotypes. This is a really significant issue. This is how the school-to-prison pipeline gets established. According to the Department of Education, and I'm just almost done, Black students receive more harsh punishments and measures, suspensions, expulsions, corporal punishment, and less mild discipline than their peers for the same conduct, even when controlling for other factors. But the statistic that really breaks my heart, that has to do with the disparities in treatment at the preschool level. Yes, the preschool level. Black children represent 18% of the preschool enrollment in this country, 18, but they represent 48% of the kids who get more than one out-of-school suspension. White students represent 43% of preschool enrollment, but 26% of these children receive more than one of out-school suspension. Can someone tell me why we're suspending preschool children? Because I missed that memo. What can children possibly be doing at 4 that require a full-out suspension? Anyway, that's an aside, but I asked the question, like, this idea of punishment and stigma and criminalization of people as young as 4 is extraordinary to me. Were he alive today, Martin King would definitely be deeply concerned about the wealth gap, the housing legacy of discrimination, and the funding and the unfunding of schools based on previous amounts of wealth. He would know that we have a lot of work to do. It would take new kinds of courage and mobilizations to tackle these myths, and the resurgence of the raw hatred in the mainstream and the denial of the reality of Black suffering would all be at the top of his list. He would be an advocate for the end of mass incarceration. He would be appalled at the numbers, Black people making up 40% of the incarcerated and 12% of the national population. But to be sure, in keeping with his compassion for all of humankind and the environment, he'd be a leader in the fight against climate change. He would battle detention centers used for immigrants looking for a better life and stand in solidarity with poor people everywhere. I feel confident in saying that he would be shocked at the level of consumerism and inequality in wealth, both of which have expanded exponentially since his death. He would ask us to pay attention to the places where it looks like we belong, and yet the terms of that participation are corrupt. Where belonging makes us complicit with the worst forms of internalized discrimination. He would, I suspect, be drawing our attention to the very opposite of Jim Crow segregation. Today, he would shine a light on the predatory power of inclusion. Martin Luther King knew that the Jim Crow South was but one iteration of a much bigger, longer process, and he knew that the country and the world had a long way to go to reducing injustice and human suffering. He would want us to celebrate him not only by this great legacy of music and community building, but by following in the spirit of his footsteps, walking toward and marching toward today's moral crises. He would tell us to celebrate our victories, but know that vital work remains. He'd be the first to say that the fight for racial justice is far from over. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
It's our tradition to sing a song that's very meaningful this time of year. We ask you to sing along with us. The song simply says that we shall overcome. This is one of the very prestigious songs at the end of every service that Dr. Samuel McKinney would sing. And so I always want to do it justice for him. He was a good friend of mine. Can you all sing with us? All right. We shall overcome. We shall Let's say it again. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome today. We shall overcome today. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe. We shall overcome. We're going to sing it one more time. Can you join the hand of the person next to you? Let's go on one key. We shall overcome. Come on. We shall overcome. You can look at him and tell him, we shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. Someday. Deep in my heart. I do believe. We shall overcome. Deep in my heart. Deep in my heart. Oh, deep in my heart. I do believe. We shall overcome. Now lift your hand. Yes. Come on and clap your hands and celebrate. Come on, you can do better than that.
Thank you so much. The baby's awake again. Dr. Rose, thank you so much for your words and for reminding us if you tell your story with a briefcase and glasses and a suit or with a microphone and a leather skirt and high heels. That's right. The story needs to be told. Absolutely. We don't want to wait for someone else to write it. Thank you for that reminder. She gave us so much to chew on and digest. The lucky thing is that a recording of today's event will be available on Seattle College's MLK website, so you can go over this again because there was so much precious and important to think about. Thank you all so much for coming today, for being part of this community, for accepting this room and calling each other out to keep telling the story, to keep the love, the action going. There is going to be a reception downstairs, and we want you just to remain in your seats for a little bit longer until the choir recesses. Thank you all so much. Have a lovely day.
Would you mind standing with us? The greatness of the Lord.
The greatness of the Lord is inconceivable.
The love that we show.
The love that we show is unconditional.
The power of the Lord.
Power of the Lord
is unbeatable.
Great is the God.
God is great.
God is great.
And He's greatly to be praised.
And greatly to be praised.
You can clap hands. God is great.
God is great.
And greatly to.
And greatly to be praised.
next year.